Yes. Welcome to Greek Like Me, the podcast about all things Greek. I'm your host, Pamela Diodes-Wood. Email us at stealthgreek@gmail.com to share comments, questions, and stories about Greeks, Greekness, or your own ethnic background. First off, a correction. I mispronounced the name of the eminent screenwriter, director, and producer Costa Gavras, who created the beautiful animated short of the Parthenon, mentioned by guest Theo Penglis in our last episode, Homer, Ancient Greece, and the Father of Archaeology with Theo Penglis. I pronounced his name Kostas Gravas, probably because I know a lovely family named Gravas, and my brain went there. Happy Pride. We wanted to close Pride Month with a bang and celebrate an important chapter in Greek history that is also a part of LGBTQ history. We're talking about the Sacred Band of Thebes, an elite 4th century BCE fighting unit made up of 150 pairs of male lovers, 300 fighters in all. Trigger warning, there will be violence, suicide, rape, and animal cruelty mentioned in today's episode, so maybe not for young or sensitive listeners. Background events are simplified to give a sense of what was happening in Thebes and the Greek city-states at the time of the Sacred Band. We're leaving a lot out due to time constraints. The Sparti dominated the Peloponnesos and outlying areas from the 6th century BCE, drawing city-states into their sphere of control through war, violence, and intimidation. They were skilled warriors with an unbeatable army. Sparta was traditionally ruled by 2 kings from separate lines. At the time of the Sacred Band, the elder, more powerful was Agesilaus II. The younger was Cleombrotos. Sparta was constantly expanding its empire with the goal of eventually ruling over all the Greeks. Thebes, like Athens, was a democratic city-state in a world dominated by oligarchies, where rich elites ruled the day. Thebes was a leading member of the Boeotian League, an alliance of sovereign city-states in the Viotia region of central Greece. The Boeotian cities had common traditions like democracy and banded together for protection and to pool resources. They had a common currency and a common army. They voted to choose leaders called Boeotarchi and make joint decisions for the good of the League while remaining separately governed city-states, like a mini-European Union or United States. The Boeotian League grew stronger throughout the 5th century BCE, putting it on Sparta's radar. Sparta began targeting members of the Boeotian League, picking them off one by one with an eye to Thebes. If it took down the head of the League, Sparta would be able to break up any further resistance to power grabs. In 382 BCE, Sparta conspired with a group of wealthy anti-democracy Thebans to infiltrate the city during the distraction of a religious festival. The city was quickly overrun and occupied. The Theban collaborators were awarded important positions in the puppet government set up by Sparta, allowing them to amass even more power and property. Dissenters were jailed or killed. Some escaped into exile, remaining in contact with others that stayed behind, quietly preparing to take back their city. In 379, 3 years after the fall of Thebes, a group of exiles led by the future general Pelopidas snuck into the city. This involved an elaborate plot with the help of the partisans, involving disguises, timing the changing of the Spartan guard, and my personal favorite, a handful of freedom fighters in drag sneaking into the junta offices during a love fest in honor of Aphrodite and knifing their would-be seducers. While guerrillas in dresses wiped out an administration orgy, Pelopidas made his way to the home of the lead collaborator and killed him. The returning exiles and the partisans within the city were able to surprise the Spartans, overthrow their military presence, and return to a democratic state. 2 of those partisans were Epaminondas and Eurygidas. Along with Pelopidas, they were voted in as leaders of Thebes and later involved in the formation and successes of the Sacred Band. Eurygidas is credited with founding the Sacred Band. Before the Spartan takeover, he'd been a cavalry commander, an elite soldier himself, as Thebes was well known for superior cavalry. He was talented and intimidating. Some scholars say he may have been inspired by Plato's Symposium to create the Sacred Band, a work that discusses the merits of gay lovers as a fighting unit. Others think Plato was inspired by the band. It's said Gorgidas personally chose the pairs of soldier lovers, younger soldiers and their more battle-experienced mentor lovers. They were deemed worthy based on their battle prowess, their character, reputations, and loyalty to Thebes. They embodied the traditional Greek model for male love, a more mature, experienced soldier, the erastes, who guided, encouraged, and instructed the younger man, the eromenos. Most elite units in ancient Greek armies were made up of the sons of the higher classes. Gorgidas selected the best he could find, regardless of social status. The Sacred Band was stationed on the Gedmia, the fortified citadel of Thebes. At a time when most Greek armies were composed of part-time citizen soldiers, James Flynn in the NEH magazine says the Sacred Band was the first professional standing army funded by the state in Greek history. Room, board, and training were all paid for by the city. They were highly, exhaustively trained for speed, endurance, and the use of weapons. Avery DeWolf writes the band was taught to fight in close quarters formation. They learned intricate movements that required a high degree of cooperation and trust between partners. But they were also instructed in philosophy and literature. The Greeks understood the value of a well-rounded man, superior in intellect, as well as physical endurance. It's well known that homosexuality was not unusual in the ancient Greek world, but it wasn't widespread either as an acceptable lifestyle. And I mean long-term male lovers. Many parts of ancient Greece accepted male-on-male liaisons, but eventually men were expected to take wives, start families, even if they had an occasional same-sex dalliance. This was particularly common for soldiers in the short term. They were off at war quite a bit. Coming of age in ancient Greece often meant young men developing relationships with older men who would mentor them in politics, philosophy, and other subjects that would prepare them for successful lives as well-heeled citizens of the city-state. These were usually temporary, romantic relationships until the young man was ready to take his place in society and marry. Even the macho warrior state of Sparta encouraged love bonds between new recruits and older soldiers. Although there were Spartan admirers like Xenophon, who found the Sacred Band's soldier lovers to be disgraceful. Thebes was a city that considered same-gender love acceptable. The connection between male lovers was seen as pure, sacred even, based on devotion. It was a source of moral virtue and military strength, according to writer James Rahm in his book, The Sacred Band. Some men maintained long-term exclusive same-sex relationships akin to marriage. Plutarch, a local from the region, said these relationships actually improved Theban society. Thebes' greatest claim to fame was being the hometown of demigod hero Heracles, and the tomb of his favorite companion on his adventures and presumed lover, Iolaus. For centuries, the tomb of Iolaus was a place of pilgrimage for male lovers, who traveled there to pledge their love in sacred vows of fidelity and devotion. It's recorded that only the men of Thebes and perhaps Ilia on the Peloponnesus made these vows to each other and lived as if they were married. General Gorgidas believed the love pledge would be as powerful as a soldier's pledge of service to Thebes, that pairs of men with a life bond of love would fight more fiercely than other units. The theory of a superior force of lover soldiers wasn't a completely novel concept. Plato's Symposium is frequently referenced in research into the Sacred Band. It's the imagined conversations and monologues of great Greek thinkers gathered together for a fictional banquet in 416 BCE. And it was written between 384 and 379 BCE, either just before or just after the formation of the Sacred Band of Thebes. Either way, it demonstrates the ideation behind the band. Plato writes a monologue for Phaedrus, an Athenian aristocrat and member of the inner circle of philosopher Socrates. Phaedrus says, if it could be arranged for a state or army to consist entirely of lovers and their beloved, they would certainly make the best possible state or army. They would abstain from everything shameful, honorably rivaling one another and fighting side by side with that heroism by which few in number could practically conquer the whole of mankind. For what lover would not rather be seen by the whole world than by his beloved in the act of desertion? He'd prefer to die 1,000 deaths. And who would think of deserting his beloved without rushing to his aid? There is no coward whom love cannot inspire to godlike courage. When Thebes broke loose from the Spartan occupation, the main purpose of the Sacred Band was to protect Thebes and the Boeotian League from the further encroachment by Sparta and push the warrior state out of areas it had already taken. First battle utilizing the skill and courage of the Sacred Band was at the start of the Boeotian War, which began shortly after the Theban revolt freed them to lead the League again. It lasted from 378 to 372 BCE. Euryalus headed the Theban army, deployed his elite unit, the Sacred Band, scattered throughout the troops, his secret weapon hidden from view, inconspicuous. Sparta had long had designs on Athens, so Athens allied with Thebes this time to outnumber the Spartan forces. Revered Athenian general Chabrias famously tripped up the Spartans that his army faced on the battlefield by ordering his troops to stand at ease. The Athenian troops raised their spears out of the attack position and held their shields below knee level, exposing themselves. General Euryalus instructed the Theban army to do the same. The Spartan king, bewildered, outnumbered, and given a show of extreme confidence by the enemy, called off hostilities and withdrew his army. There were a series of rules of battle, protocols, proper and expected procedure in Greek wars. You approached the enemy, your army deployed in the same way as his, attacks, pauses, retreats, all followed rules. Chabrias had turned that expectation on its head, unnerving the Spartan king. The Athenian general was forever admired in Thebes for this heroic act that turned the tide, at least for a time. And it seems he inspired the later generals of the Theban army. Thebes, under the command of Gorgidas, repelled Spartan invasions in the region in 378 and 377. Spartan units began sneaking into the area to destroy crops outside of Thebes and nearby free city-states. Farms were located outside of city walls and were at risk during the night. Spartan troops disrupted supply routes. As some of these Boeotian cities finally fell to the Spartans, many of their citizens escaped to Thebes. It was the Battle of Thyrea in 375 that finally made the Sacred Band a household name. Pelopidas had been voted general of the Theban army that year. He was determined to push the Spartans out of Boeotia. He led a handful of riders and the Sacred Band to take the city of Orchomenos from Spartan control, while the occupying army was off on a mission. It seemed low risk. But on their way there, Pelopidas learned a large force of Spartan reinforcements was on its way to Orchomenos. Pelopidas ordered the retreat, but on the way home they bumped into the original Spartan unit, returning to Orchomenos from its mission. As they reached Thyrea on their path home, the Thebans found themselves trapped on a narrow draw facing the Spartans. They couldn't pass and were too close to reverse course. Pelopidas had to think fast. The Spartans outmanned them at least 2-1. The general arranged the Sacred Band closely together near the front of the line. The Spartans formed a phalanx, preparing for battle. Encyclopedia Britannica's description of a phalanx paints a picture. It is a tactical formation consisting of a block of heavily armed infantry standing shoulder to shoulder, several ranks deep. Squadron leaders moved to the front of the Spartan line. Pelopidas ordered his riders to attack. Plutarch describes what happens next. Pelopidas and the Sacred Band charged the two polemarchs, military commanders, on the Spartan right wing. Both were taken out immediately. The Spartans were totally thrown off. This wasn't the way things usually went down. In the chaos, the Sacred Band charged in, breaking the Spartan line. The Spartans pulled back and parted their army like the Red Sea to allow the Thebans to move through their ranks and leave. It would have been the sensible thing to do with the Thebans so outnumbered. Historians think the likely plan was let the Thebans run through to escape the larger army, close ranks, and attack them from the rear. But partway through passing the line of Spartan soldiers, Pelopidas gave the order to attack. Surprise! Much violence ensued, and the Spartan army retreated. The Theban army, doing unexpected things in an unexpected way, won the battle. The battle couldn't have lasted more than 2 hours, possibly less than that, but the ramifications were enormous. Plutarch writes, "Never before had an army in superior numbers been overpowered by an inferior force." And the Spartans were rattled. The entire Greek world was rattled. No city-state in Greece believed its army equal to the might of the Spartans, yet the smaller Theban army had won the day. Pelopidas led his army back to the battlefield, where they took trophies from the fallen enemy and likely abused the bodies of the Spartan dead just to make their point. They built a makeshift monument, a marker trumpeting the victory of Thebes. With this battle, the Sacred Band won the reputation as being the greatest of all Theban warriors. The city's prestige and influence was on the rise. From then on, Pelopidas changed the deployment of the Sacred Band. According to Plutarch, Gorgidas, the previous Theban general, did not direct the strength of the Sacred Band upon a common object, since it was dissipated and blended with that of a large body of inferior troops. But Pelopidas, after their valor, had shown out at Teira, where they fought by themselves and about his own person, never afterwards divided or scattered them, but treated them as a unit, put them into the forefront of the greatest conflicts. Pelopidas was voted commander of the Theban army annually for some time to come. During all this, there were multiple gatherings of the Greek city-states to hammer out peace treaties, which apparently never lasted very long, but that's what they were doing. Thebes was now a major player in these conferences, but Spartan king Agesilaus held a grudge, partly due to Thebes' upstart ways and the embarrassment of being upstaged in battle, and partly due to the uppity speeches delivered by Theban envoy and hero of the resistance, Epaminondas. Epaminondas had participated in the uprising against the occupying Spartans back in 379, but didn't take part in the violence. He eschewed violence, but he was very happy to be a thorn in the side of Agesilaus by inspiring and emboldening the cities of Boeotia to push back against Sparta. Agesilaus was so angry at Epaminondas' verbal sparring and calls to rebel against Sparta, he removed Thebes from a proposed peace treaty and prepared to invade. Had Epaminondas pushed too far? Ram says, Epaminondas had not acted impulsively or without popular support. Everything he'd done suggests confidence and planning. Thebes was ready to go head-to-head with Sparta for the win, to free Boeotia and every freedom-loving Greek state from the tyranny of Sparta. The lesser Spartan king, Cleombrotos, was ordered to march on Thebes. By late July, early August, the Spartan army had reached Lefkra, a plain situated about 10 miles or 16 kilometers from Thebes. The Theban and Spartan armies camped on nearby hilltops across from each other. There was an old legend in Lefkra that warned of Spartan defeat on this exact spot. It goes, many years ago, 2 beautiful girls lived on a small farm with their father, a man named Skedasos. One day, two passing Spartans harassed them, perhaps as they went about their chores. Spotting the father, the Spartans eventually went on their way, because ass-hatty men harass women until they think another man might call them out. It's called the Andrew Tate approach. Days later, the two Spartans were again passing the farm, but this time they found the sisters alone. They raped and murdered them. The soldiers threw the bodies into the well and ran away. The next day, after searching for his children all night, the father and his dog finally found them. Neighbors told the grieving Skedasos that they'd seen Spartans hanging around the property while he was away. Skedasos traveled to Sparta to find justice for his children. He pleaded with citizens, judges, and the king himself. They all ignored him and forced him on his way. Heartbroken and frustrated, no one would be held accountable for the horrific fate of his daughters. Skedasos finally collapsed. Pounding the ground, he summoned the Furies, goddesses of vengeance and justice, who traveled the world meting out punishment to villains. Inconsolable, Skedasos eventually hung himself. From that moment, Sparta was warned by all of the oracles to beware the wrath of Lefkra. As they prepared for battle against Sparta, the Thebans had left offerings at the tomb of the murdered sisters. It was believed by many, including later historians, that the ghosts of the sisters inhabited the place, and that they, perhaps with the help of the Furies summoned by their father, had a hand in what happened on that battlefield later. Plutarch claims General Pelopidas had a dream the night before the battle. The murdered sisters and their father appeared before him, cursing Sparta, demanding the general sacrifice a fair-haired virgin in their name. When he woke up, Pelopidas told his officers about the dream, but sacrificing virgins was no longer a thing, and none of them wanted any part of it. But did they dare snub the sisters? Just then, a mare with a white mane appeared in the Theban camp. Pelopidas and his officers took it as a sign that the horse would represent the fair-haired virgin and sacrificed it to the sisters. Then Moresi, what the heck? There were other omens pre-battle. Pilgrims to the nearby shrine of Heracles frequently left tribute in the form of weapons. These swords, daggers, shields, helmets, and such had piled up outside of the shrine and over time began to rust and decay. But as Thebes prepared to meet the invading Spartans, the weapons were found lined up on the ground, cleaned, polished, and ready for use. Another sign. On the Kadmia, the citadel above Thebes, there stood a statue of Athena, goddess of wisdom and battle strategy. A shield lay in front of the statue. Whether that was a tribute of a pilgrim or part of the statue's presentation, I don't know. But before the army marched for Lefkra, the statue was found holding the shield, battle-ready. Epaminondas, now leader of the Theban army while his compatriot Pelopidas commanded the Sacred Band, addressed the troops, stating Athena had proven herself prepared to fight for Thebes. Quite a morale boost for the army. Epaminondas stood in front of his army before they deployed, firing up the troops. He held up a live snake, and I already don't like where this is going. He crushed its head, killing it. What the heck? The snake didn't start the fight. Epaminondas told his troops it would be the same with the Spartan army. If they destroyed the elite soldiers and their commanders, the head of the army, the rest of the troops, made up of slaves and reluctant allies, would collapse. Thebes had grown stronger, with Pelopidas and the Sacred Band leading the Theban army. They were a well-oiled machine, with the two generals relying on each other, their strengths complementing each other. Epaminondas used the same strategy Pelopidas had 4 years earlier at Deira, using the Sacred Band in tight deployment, which Ram says made it more like a projectile than a phalanx, striking its target head-on with hurtling force. Epaminondas' contribution to battle strategy was another change from normal battle protocol. Greek armies put their strongest warriors to the right, facing the weaker side of each other's armies. I'm imagining the soldiers from the occupied states, forced to fight for Sparta, relegated to the left side, expecting to fight the fiercest of the Theban fighters. Oh my gosh. Traditionally, once the weak troops were annihilated, the cream of the crop in both armies turned on each other. But Epaminondas strengthened his left side with a sacred band and a phalanx including 50 rows of his best fighters, greater than the norm. This powerhouse left wing of the Theban army wouldn't be facing Sparta's weakest link, but the strongest of the Spartan warriors. The weaker right side of the Theban army would now face the reluctant and truly intimidated allies of Sparta. But they weren't going to charge them, but wait for these wavering troops to react to the fierce attack against their best fighters. Epaminondas was counting on triggering a rout. In all honesty, the stronger unit of the Spartan army was not what it had been in its heyday. Only a fraction of the right flank were true elites, warriors that had been rigorously trained and battle-hardened since childhood. Maybe the Spartan army was just stretched thin, with outposts all over the Peloponnesos and within the city-states of Phoenicia. Many had fallen in wars and battles, including mercenary work in Persia. One theory is a drop in population may have been a factor for a smaller standing army. There were fewer citizen soldiers in the ranks and more slaves or denigrated Spartan allies who were denied equality by their overlords. It may have been a result of the increasingly smaller groups of elites in Sparta accumulating the majority of the wealth in the kingdom, to the detriment of the working citizens who were the backbone of Sparta. Spartan elites, like the American Koch brothers, were starving out their less well-to-do fellow citizens while expecting them to fight their wars, keep the city running, and suffer under the burden of debt and the inability to support their families. The Spartans were literally outnumbered within their own army by slaves and outsiders. Kleombrotos offered Thebes a peace treaty. Remember, they'd been left off the last one. But Epaminondas said, "Nuh-uh, come and get us." The armies met on the field at Deftra. Thebes was outnumbered again. Kleombrotos reportedly made an inexplicable change in the ranks before battle began. He put his cavalry ahead of his usual front line formation, which had been specially trained to withstand frontal assaults. Meanwhile, the Theban army had released its soldiers from its ally Thespia in full view of the Spartan army. They were reluctant to fight. Epaminondas wanted to make a show of allowing allies to make their own choice whether to fight in democratic fashion. Both cavalries charged. Thebans, renowned horsemen, going back generations. Spartans didn't put much stock in men on horses. The infantry-centered Spartan army put their weakest warriors on horseback. Thebes broke through the Spartan cavalry, pushing them back into their infantry. Spartan warriors bounced back into the ranks and were trampled by their own cavalry. Plutarch says, the enemy understood what Epaminondas was doing and began to change their formation. They were opening up their right wing and making an encircling movement in order to surround Epaminondas and envelop him with their numbers. But at this point, Pelopidas darted forth from his position and with his band of 300 on the run, came up. Pelopidas and the Sacred Band charged, attacking the right wing of the Spartan army, while Epaminondas led his phalanx straight in to create further havoc as they disrupted the enemy lines again. Plutarch describes what happens next. Since the phalanx of Epaminondas bore down upon them alone and neglected the rest of their force, and since Pelopidas engaged them with incredible speed and boldness, their courage and skill was so confounded that there was a flight and slaughter of the Spartans such as had never been seen before. Kleombrotos was knocked off of his horse, badly wounded. Several of the elite Spartan soldiers stopped fighting to protect the fallen king and carry him to safety. Spartan officers were cut down by the band. Spartan allies ran off. In 300 years, There had never been a Spartan rout until now. Kleombrotos was the first Spartan monarch to be killed on the battlefield in generations. Sparta was unable to regroup and counterattack after losing so many of its best warriors and officers. Instead, Sparta requested a truce to collect their dead. In the tradition of Greek warfare, an acknowledgement of defeat. Thebes, in another break from protocol, insisted the Spartan allies collect their dead first. Besides the snub, it gave them a good idea of how many actual Spartans had been lost. The Theban army collected trophies from the enemy dead and erected their temporary monument to victory on a stump. The reputation of the Sacred Band as a driving force behind Theban victory was now recognized throughout Greece. Messengers were sent to all corners of the Greek world. News of Sparta's loss spread. It took 3 days for the news to reach Sparta. The authorities kept it from the citizens for days. Agesilaus was furious, determined to have revenge against the upstart backwater democratic state that had humiliated his empire. There were still Spartan outposts in Boeotia. Agesilaus deployed reinforcements and sent for his allies to join Sparta in quashing Thebes. Thebes read the writing on the wall and sent for Athens to help them defeat Sparta once and for all. But Athens pivoted again. When Sparta was surging in power, Athens pledged allegiance to Thebes. When Thebes beat back Sparta, Athens became suspicious that Thebes and its Boeotian League was maybe getting too powerful. Sparta still had allies, and there was fear Athens would soon join them. So Thebes looked to the north. The wacky warlord Jason Afara, a future episode subject, showed up with his army, offering to broker a truce. It gave a warlord status to help make peace between two great Greek powers. The Spartans picked up their marbles, or at least their reinforcements, and left the game. Ram said, "Thus ended the fifth and last Spartan attack on Thebes. The Sacred Band had dealt the Spartans their first open field defeat in centuries." After the victory at Leuctra, Epaminondas continued to build coalitions of democratic states. Cities from northern and central Greece wanted to ally themselves with the city that turned back mighty Sparta. And Thebes, with its great leaders and impressive army, wanted to lead this coalition. Pelopidas was now involved in helping Thessalia in the north to remain free from the wacky warlord, Jason Afara. Epaminondas was popular, repeatedly voted to head the Theban army, including the Sacred Band. After his success against Sparta, Epaminondas marched his army into the Peloponnesos, home region of Sparta, helping to free cities there from Spartan control. Veering from the norm per usual, the freed cities were not subjugated by Thebes, but liberated and given a vote in the coalition they joined. A lot was happening throughout Greece at this time. Cities building walls and forts to keep Sparta out, Sparta licking its wounds and plotting to rebuild its empire. Epaminondas was behind a strategy to build and fortify new democratic cities in the Peloponnesos, including Megalopolis and Mycenae. In 370, the newly created Arcadian League of the Peloponnesos was trying to evade Sparta's attempts to dismantle it and regain influence over the region. The Arcadians asked Epaminondas for help. The problem was it was winter, not only the off-season for battle, but also near time for Thebes to take a vote on the general of the army. Leading the army away on a mission at the time of the vote was considered treasonous. The penalty was death. The assembly at Thebes agreed to send help while Epaminondas was still in charge, so he led the army on what was expected to be a brief mission of less than a month to help repel Spartan troops from the Arcadian city called Mantinea. By the time the Theban army arrived, the Spartans had already abandoned the city. The Arcadian League was trying to persuade Epaminondas to pursue the retreating Spartan army back to their homeland and end the aggression of Sparta forever. Epaminondas had 70,000 troops, including the Sacred Band, those 300 men that were worth a dozen soldiers each. And he was tempted. Sparta had never shown such weakness, had never been beaten back or pursued. Some of his officers wanted to return home and not risk the accusation for treason, for acting outside of the terms of office that was quickly approaching. Epaminondas felt compelled to pursue the advantage he and the Arcadian allies believed they held and marched to attack Sparta. Spartan slaves had already begun escaping the city, crossing over to the Theban lines. A small number of Spartan soldiers attempted to switch sides, but were found out. We don't know what happened to them. The Thebans were already running low on the food and supplies they had pillaged from outlying Spartan farms and villages. The villagers always get the blunt end of the stick. Epaminondas and the army made their way across the river that stood between them and an area south of the city, when suddenly the Athenian army appeared to help Sparta. Oh, those Athenians. Epaminondas diverted the troops to nearby Mount Ithome to hole up for the rest of the winter. He sent word to any who wanted to join them in smacking down Sparta. The army and their growing number of allies built a full-on city up there. Walls, roads, towers, meeting halls, barracks, a gymnasium. In a matter of months, some say. Allies, escaped slave and disgruntled Spartans who showed up, took over finishing the city and settled in, while Epaminondas and the army returned to Thebes to face charges of treason. Thanks to his eloquence at trial and his continued successes, charges were dismissed, and he was voted back in for another year. How did Epaminondas make it back to Thebes without encountering angry Spartans or their Athenian allies? Historians say an Athenian general screwed up and had his troops block the wrong road to prevent Epaminondas from escaping. Rom, who wrote the Sacred Band, which is an extremely readable book with lots of great background, suspects the Athenian leader's mistake was deliberate. He may not have wanted to come head-to-head with the famed Sacred Band of Thebes. After his reinstatement as general, Epaminondas headed back to Sparta, which was now allied with Syracuse, an ancient Greek city settled 400 years earlier on the island of Sicily. The trippy tyrant of Syracuse, another future episode, sent exotic Celts and Iberians to fight for Sparta. These mercenaries had new technology never before seen on mainland Greece: horse saddles, enabling them to sit more securely and control their animals with greater ease. They blocked the Isthmus of Corinth, which connects the Peloponnesus to central Greece, the direction the Theban army was coming from, leaving Epaminondas and his army stuck on their own side. But the general was able to spot a weakness in the barrier, and by calculating the distance his army would have to cover, with the time frame of the changing of the Spartan guard, he knew when they should attack. The Theban army was able to break through in the short time it took for the new guard to take its place at the barrier. The Thebans were able to reach their allies in the Peloponnesus. But as they were passing Corinth, the Spartan garrison that guarded and protected the isthmus, Epaminondas decided to attack it. The Sacred Band charged the gate on the expectation they could force their way through an entry that seemed not properly closed. Believe it or not, it seems several ancient Greek battles were won because someone forgot to shut the back door. But Corinthian soldiers were gathered behind the gate, maybe taking a cue from their tricky enemy. They were able to force back the Theban army, killing some of the Sacred Band and dragging their bodies inside the wall. The Thebans had to retreat without the bodies of the fallen. Epaminondas made a formal request for the return of the bodies, signaling defeat. It was the first defeat of the Sacred Band. After this, the Celts attacked. Besides their saddles giving them advantage, they threw javelins that easily took out many of the Theban soldiers. After a few days of this slaughter, Epaminondas retreated. The city of Thebes was furious at him for missed opportunities to attack the Spartans, and for what in hindsight seemed a foolhardy attack on Corinth, resulting in the deaths of a number of the Sacred Band, the most treasured soldiers of the city. The strategies and events of these battles are so complicated, everyone could be its own episode. Next vote, Epaminondas lost control of the army. His successors lacked his savvy and clever military strategy and fluffed an attempt to rescue their hero, Pelopidas, now hostage of yet another nutty tyrant, Alexandra of Phera. This is like a nutty tyrant episode. The tyrant sent for Athens and Syracuse, with more Celts in the mix, and took the advantage. Theban troops lost faith in their generals and demanded a common soldier fighting in their ranks be given command. That soldier was Epaminondas, who joined up at the lowest rank to support his troops. Epaminondas immediately reorganized the troops, leading them to beat off Alexander of Phera's army and allowing them to retreat to safety. Epaminondas was voted back in as general and led another rescue mission, properly planned and executed this time. The Sacred Band in the forefront, which succeeded in rescuing Pelopidas and a fellow Theban from Phera. The wars between Thebes and Sparta went on for a total of 15 years. They vied for allies, including the Persian Empire, snatched cities back and forth from each other. The amazing thing was Thebes had somehow become a power able to keep Sparta off balance, all due to cunning strategy and the super warriors that were the Sacred Band, their very presence inspiring and goading on their fellow soldiers. Thebes was beginning to lose some of its allies in the Peloponnesos before 364 BC. They were suspicious of Thebes' strength, even though the powerful city had never attempted to subjugate anyone. That year, Pelopidas led a small army to challenge his former captor, Alexander of Phera, with the aim of freeing Thessalia from his raids and aggressions. There was an eclipse of the sun the day before they were supposed to march. It was seen as an ominous sign by the seers of Thebes, so the plan was shelved. Pelopidas, determined to keep his promise to Thessalia, raised a volunteer army. Pelopidas himself slaughtered Alexander of Phera's bodyguards and had nearly gotten to the tyrant himself before he was killed. The faraway death of Pelopidas hit the Sacred Band hard. He had led 2 generations of the warriors in battle. Older soldiers, or those lost to battle, had been replaced by younger hand-picked couples. The fierce reputation and heroism of the former captain of the band was a point of pride. The army that had been detained by city officials because of the eclipse was now sent to force Alexander of Phera to make peace. Meanwhile, the coalitions Epaminondas had worked so hard to form were splintering, some realigning with Sparta. In 362 BCE, Mantinea had moved over to the Spartan side and had sparked animosity with a neighboring city allied with Thebes. Tempers flared. Pressure was on Thebes to respond. Athens, Sparta, and a number of other cities sent armies to stand with Mantinea. Other armies, including those of Thessalia and Maiaia's home region of Messenia, joined the Theban assault. A complicated series of events culminated in a field battle between the Spartan and Theban armies. As the 2 armies first approached the battle site, the Theban side appeared to make camp for the night. The larger Spartan army followed suit, putting down their weapons, bedding down the horses. Once the Spartans had scattered about their camp, the Theban army grabbed their weapons and charged before the Spartans had a chance to put their togas on. Thebes' best warriors, led by the Sacred Band, took the hastily deployed right wing of the enemy, hitting Sparta's elite head-on until they fell back, pursued by the Theban army. Leading the way, Epaminondas was felled by a Spartan spear. The Theban army came to a halt, and the Spartans escaped. Epaminondas was mortally wounded. Sparta had been routed, yet both armies built trophies, and both sought permission to retrieve and bury their dead. That means both were signaling victory and defeat at the same time. All of Hellas was confused. In the end, historians awarded the win to Thebes. Epaminondas was buried near the battlefield. is Eromenos, his love, a young warrior who had been fighting beside him, was buried with him. Greek historian Polybios wrote, "The success of Thebes grew, attained its height, and ceased with the lives of Epaminondas and Pelopidas, and therefore we must regard the temporary splendor of that state as due not to its constitution, but to its men." Rome writes that after the death of Epaminondas, Thebes, as the champion of freedom from tyranny, seemed to have lost its way. The next big chapter in the tale of the Sacred Band and the Theban army is the Third Sacred War, fought between 356 to 346 BCE. Phokis, a region of central Greece, hired an army with money lent them by Athens and Sparta. Alarm bells right there. Its plan was to capture the Delphic Shrine, one of the most sacred temples in Hellas. Up to that time, Thebes had controlled the shrine from its position as head of the League of the local city-states. The Phokis army seized the shrine and proceeded to plunder the riches given in tribute over the centuries. The Sacred War was declared by the Amphictyonic Council, that's a mouthful, what Rome describes as an interstate board that enforced the shrine's sacred laws. The general of the Theban army, Pamenes, prepared to invade and recapture Delphi. And the Theban army beat the Phocians, but instead of remaining to ensure the good behavior of Phokis and the recovery of tributes of the Delphic shrine, Pamenes and a chunk of the army went off to join a revolt against the king of Persia in order to make money for Thebes. Bad decision. While he was gone, the Phocians picked up the pieces, regathered their army of paid mercenaries, increased its size, and regained control of the shrine. Pamenes died in Persia. Meanwhile, the Phocians began stripping the shrine of every bit of gold. Most of Hellas believed Apollo would punish the Phocians for their blasphemy. Thebes struggled without the strong leadership it had known in the days of Pelopidas and Epaminondas. Former ally Thessalia could no longer count on Thebes to help shield it from the tyrants of Phera. So they turned to Philip II of Macedonia. And he came. His army was initially pushed back, but Philip had spent time in Thebes as a youth, studying the tactics and strategies of Pelopidas and Epaminondas, observing the feats of the Sacred Band. His second run at Phera was successful. Phokis, the temple plunderers, they were an ally of Phera and came to its defense. The Phokis army attacked the Macedonians, and they were demolished. The Phokis, not the Macedonians. Philip executed huge numbers of Phocian soldiers by driving them into the sea. Bodies unburied meant souls unable to rest. That's why it was so important to retrieve the bodies of the dead soldiers in battle. This punishment was seen as just for what Philip and most of Greece considered temple robbers, the lowest of human beings. The successor of the Phocian king, who started the temple robbing scandal, rather than being remorseful, stepped up the plundering of the Delphic shrine. His army was easily replaceable. They were bought and paid for, and bought again. Theban citizen soldiers, however, were being decimated. Finally, Thebes turned to the hero of Thessalia to help. They sent for Philip. The Phocians quickly banished their king, executed a few community leaders, and offered to make restitution for the damage done at Delphi. The exiled Phocian king holed up in the pass at Thermopylae. Yes, Thermopylae. The one passage Philip needed to access all of central and southern Greece. The exiled king traded Thermopylae for safe passage out of the region, giving Philip II of Macedonia what he needed to take Greece. Sparta was no longer a threat. Philip wanted Athens. Thebes had always stood for Greek freedom and democracy against tyranny. Even though Athens had allied against them again and again, Thebes answered the call. Older veterans of the Sacred Band still honored the memory of the Athens alliance against Sparta when Thebes threw off the occupiers in 379. In 339, 40 years later, the the Theban army led by the Sacred Band pushed Philip's troops out of the fort of Nicaea near Thermopylae. Philip retaliated by seizing the road leading to Thebes and demanded the city align with him against Athens. Thebes would not. Athens gave its troops over to Theban command. Philip's 35,000 troops faced the smaller combined army of less than 11,000. According to Joshua J. Mark in his article in the Sacred Band, the Macedonian army, quote, was essentially the Sacred Band on a much larger level. They had been trained and maneuvered like the Sacred Band that Philip had admired in his youth. In addition, he'd armed his troops with the sarissa, a pike nearly 1.5 times the length of Theban spears. He'd improved the swords and helmets that his army used. The Thebans were outmanned, and their weaponry was inferior. The Theban army, now led by General Theagenes, marched to the plain of Heronia, near the city of the same name, and sat at the entrance of the Boeotian region. Theagenes changed tactics away from that of his famous predecessors back to tradition, placing the Sacred Band and the strongest soldiers of the army on the right, leaving the less experienced Athenian soldiers on the weaker left to face the full force of Philip's best warriors. The plan was to take out Philip's 18-year-old son Alexander. Yeah, that's Alexander the Great in the future. He was fighting his first open-field battle. Then they would swing around to help the Athenians against the more hardened Macedonian warriors. But Theagenes did not send the Sacred Band in first, taking advantage of their superhuman ability to move in quickly and penetrate enemy lines. Instead, he held them back. And Philip, the one-time student of the Sacred Band, moved first, rapidly pushing between the Sacred Band and their weaker allies to the left, enabling Alexander to push in and surround the Sacred Band. Row after row of the Sacred Band was cut down as Alexander led his men to viciously and ruthlessly attack, chopping and hacking at them even after they'd fallen. The Sacred Band refused to surrender and fought to the last man. Philip easily defeated the Athenian army. Afterward, Plutarch says, Philip went to survey the scene of the slaughter of the Sacred Band. He found all 300 lying together where they'd fallen in battle, among their weapons and the service of the Macedonians. As he looked over the dead, Plutarch says Philip was moved to tears by their bravery and forever cursed those who ever suggested that the Sacred Band could have done anything shameful in their love bond. Philip cremated his dead. Their ashes were placed in a burial mound measuring 200 feet or 61 meters. The mound is still there, now a hill covered in cypress trees. The Thebans dug a mass grave for the Sacred Band, not far from a temple of Heracles, and the main road home to Thebes. They placed their honored dead in the form of a phalanx, 7 or 8 to a row, as if ready for battle. A number of pairs of the dead were laid with their arms linked. They weren't buried with their weapons, but a more intimate item, their strigils, or stelai in Greek, metal tools for scraping sweat off after exercise in the gymnasium or military drills. See, these tools marked the owner as an athlete. Athletes were the best of citizens, the most admired, because they were strong and fit in mind and body, and therefore the best prepared to defend their city. Pausanias, a Greek geographer of the 2nd century who traveled Greece, describing what he saw, wrote, "As one approaches Heronia, there is a tomb of the Thebans who died in the battle with Philip. No inscription adorns it, but a monument stands in the form of a lion, the best emblem of the spirit of those men." The monument, called the Lion of Heronia, was erected over the mass grave of the Sacred Band. In time it disappeared. The very top of the stone monument was discovered accidentally in 1818 by British travelers. When it was unearthed, it was found to be the nearly 2-meter or 6-foot tall carved head of a lion. It weighed over 3 tons. Soon the mass grave itself was excavated, exposing the skeletons of the Sacred Band. The strigils were found. The couples linked at the elbow. The terrible violence visible on their bones, some of them missing pieces of their bodies. The skeletons arranged as if in a phalanx, numbering nearly 300. Ram says when the Sacred Band fell, the destiny of Hellas was changed forever. Its city-states knuckled under to a single ruler, Philip, their freedom lost. Like his father before him, Alexander the Great modeled the elite units of his army on the Sacred Band of Thebes and conquered in time most of the known world. In the late 19th century, a closeted gay Englishman named George Cecil Ives read about the Sacred Band and felt inspired. He created a secret society of gay men and called it the Order of Caronia, a society named in honor of proudly gay men supported in their same-sex bond, who fiercely fought and defended the freedom of the Greek world. A gay men's society of the same name still exists in England, although likely unconnected to the original. The society's emblem contains an image of the lion of Heronia. Thanks for listening. Greek Like Me is a South Greek production. This episode was researched, written, and narrated by me, your host, Pamela Diodes Wood. Our producer, photographer, and post-production editor is Douglas John. Our thanks to James B. Weiner for permission to use his photo of the 4th century BCE Greek warrior stele from the Pushkin Museum in Moscow for our announcements. And many thanks to Mark Cartwright of World History Encyclopedia for getting us that permission. World History Encyclopedia is a wonderful online resource for Greek history and world history. We use several of their articles for our research, and I've used several of the articles in past episodes. Links are posted on our sources page. Visit our website, stealthgreek.com, for resources, photos, links, and more. Please rate, like, and subscribe. It helps us get noticed so we can keep making content about Greeks and Greek culture. Find Greek Like Me on Facebook and Instagram, and at Greek_like_me. See you next time, which will be middle of July, because Douglas John is going to Thessaloniki for a few weeks. Bye now. Yassas.